Politics of time. I am Indranil Chakraborty. For the first time, Depot is focusing on the global south. From 1990 onwards, South Asia experienced one of the fastest growths in the global economic space. The uneven and combined development of the region's nation states created an offshore service market for the global north. This seamlessly established the capital flow from the global north to global south. While the region needs the North's technology, for example, big data, artificial intelligence, and cloud computing, as well as capital, pension and hedge funds, the North leverages the cheap labor and natural resource of the region to get garments, leather, gems, and jewelry, and so on, from countries such as India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. However, the stellar growth of the service sector in South Asia has led to the closure or stagnation of its organized manufacturing industries. Optimum use of technology, cheap labor from the countryside, and abundant capital from the global north, where the interest rate is low, are the basis of reindustrialization in South Asia. Today, we have some speakers from 4 countries, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, who will talk about the deindustrialization and reindustrialization of South Asia in the middle of inequality, precarity, and prosperity. I hope this roundtable conference will generate interest and knowledge for future deindustrialization and reindustrialization studies. Piyusha Chatterjee, who did her PhD at Concordia recently, finished her PhD at Concordia recently, will be the moderator. So now over to Piyusha.
Thank you, Indra. So my name is Piyusha Chatterjee, and I work at the Center for Oral History and Digital Storytelling at Concordia University. And without any further talk, I will introduce the speakers. So I'll go one at a time as the speakers speak. So first we have Dr. Shubho Basu, who teaches South Asian history at McGill University. Trained at Cambridge University as South Asianist, he started his academic career as Smuts Fellow at the Center for South Asian Studies at Cambridge University, and later taught at SOAS, London University, Illinois State University, and Syracuse University. He works on labor history and the history of social movement. His first book, Does Class Matter? Colonial Capital and Workers' Resistance in Bengal, focuses on the processes of industrialization and labor responses in late colonial Kolkata. It explains how solidarities among workers were produced and dismantled in the process of political mobilization at a particular historical juncture. His second work, co-authored with Ali Riaz, titled Paradise Lost, State Failure in Nepal, studies the pattern of state formation in Nepal and focuses the roots of crisis of monarchical Hindu polity. His recent monograph focuses on how social movements and national emancipation struggles in global 60s informed and influenced the birth of Bangladesh. He co-edited several volumes on South Asian history with Crispin Bates, Suranjan Das, and Sanjay Bhattacharya. He also published articles in Modern Asian Studies, Comparative Studies in Middle East, Africa, and South Asia, Gender and History and Critical Asian Studies. Dr. Basu will present a broad historical perspective on industrialization and deindustrialization in South Asia in the pre-independent and post-independent periods. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Chakraborty, for organizing this panel, and thank you, Dr. Chatterjee, for moderating it. I shall not take much time because I am actually going to cover a broad history of the deindustrialization and deindustrialization in South Asia. Industrialization and deindustrialization constitute a dialectical pairing of the same process of social transformation. Joseph Schumpeter, an apt analyst of capitalist economy, described this as the perennial gales of creative destruction. While Schumpeter was certain that in principle, innovation and technological transformation improve human condition of living, he was also aware that such changes tend to make some individuals worse off in the short run. Many may face income losses, loss in the confidence of their own abilities, and may contribute towards increase in the devaluation of their human capital. Marx, a political economist of the 19th century capitalism and a philosopher of social transformation, in his book Capital, hinted that the cycle of expansion and depression is the result of a lack of demand caused by the internal mechanism of capitalist economy. In analyzing the history of South Asian economy over almost 300 years, I may try to put Marxian macroeconomic analysis into conversation with Schumpeter's understanding of creative destruction. I may also temper Schumpeter's understanding of creative destruction by referring to the role of the state, but mostly I shall draw upon Rajnayan Shamrao Chandavarkar's prescient observation that the history of industrial capitalism could not be written without reference to workers' resistance. Various sections of labor's resistance to the designs of capital shaped the trajectory of industrialization and played a pivotal role in deindustrialization. South Asia experienced a slow but steady process of integration with global capitalist development from the 16th century onwards. Vasco da Gama's successful discovery of sea route to India, avoiding the Turkish control over Mediterranean Sea, coincided with Columbus's discovery of Caribbean. The flow of silver bullion into India trade accompanied India's own commercial revolution. The rise of Dane's banking network and the greater balance between the agrarian, commercial, and industrial activities tended to mark the Mughal era as an era of proto-capitalistic development. I shall combine here Irfan Habib's brilliant description of potentials of capitalist development with Frank Perlin's idea of proto-industrialization. Frank Perlin argued that India and Europe were impacted by profound transformation of their societies and economies and state forms from the 17th century onwards. From this era, there flourished local merchant capitalism in India, which emerged independently that of Europe, but within a common international societal and commercial changes. His study of commercial manufactures in Bengal and Gujarat reflected the increasingly international character of commodity production relations during this period. A later addition to this early modern economic history was that of Prasannan Parthasarathy, who followed the California School's interpretation of Great Divergence. Like Kenneth Pramonaz, R. B. Wong, and Jean Laurent Rosenthal and the late Andre Gunder Frank, Prasannan Parthasarathy claims that India long dominated the global market for cotton cloth. Its unsurpassed quality made Indian cloth an international object of desire, and at the same time challenged would-be competitors everywhere. It was this challenge that provoked the British, an early industrial power, to seek technological means to overcome the obstacles they faced in developing strong warp threads and mastering the colorful dyes and printing patterns, a hallmark of Indian product. As British East India Company came to control India's foreign trade in cotton textiles in the first quarter of the 19th century, the entire industrial edifice of the subcontinent's economic prosperity had been undermined. This emphasized more the role of the state, colonial conquest, and also to a certain degree, obviously, the technological transformations. Like old nationalists, this line of argument of Prasannan Parthasarathy emphasized the role of colonial state in undermining the Indian economy. Indeed, the great debate about colonial political economic transition hinged on the idea of deindustrialization. For nearly 2 decades, historians such as Maurice D. Morris and Tirthankar Roy sought to refute the idea of deindustrialization, while nationalist Marxist historians promoted the idea. As stated earlier, the so-called process of disputed deindustrialization in the late 19th century was accompanied by industrialization. It was an example of creative destruction whereby cottage industries disappeared and new industrial concerns replaced cottage industries, a process mediated by colonial state. The largest industrialization drive in the late colonial India was the state-guided infrastructural transformation, namely the construction of railways. It was pet project of the colonial government, and the government guaranteed profits at 5% rate ad valorem for British investors. It also acquired land through a legislation. The legislation stipulated that land for projects deemed necessary for national within interest could be acquired at a price below market rate. Like railway, a large area of land was acquired at a little compensation to peasant proprietors and sometimes without any compensation for setting up plantations. It was also the period when agro-processing industries such as jute textile flourished in Bengal, and Mumbai witnessed the rise of cotton textile industry. Both jute and cotton textile industry had significant backward and forward linkage with agriculture, and thus linked the small peasant economy with the fluctuations in the global market. Both these industries faced massive labor unrest, and workers left their imprint on the industrial process. British industrialists who ran the managing agency houses in Calcutta, as Roger Trey argues, how much time? I couldn't see it.
3 minutes left.
Okay, as Roger Trey argues, had a growing desire to repatriate their profits, and this led to the changed ratio of profitability of remittance versus reinvestment, and these caused lowering of wage rates and labor unrest. It is in this period that a social and political environment atmosphere generated by the national movement impelled Indian houses such as J.R.D. Tata, G.D. Birla, Walchand, and Sriram to go beyond normal business considerations in the initiation of new industries. India witnessed the rise of heavy industries such as steel, cement, chemical, automobiles, aluminum, and machine tools. Yet, despite the emergence of vast industrial sector, India witnessed limited degree of industrialization. Indeed, during the last 4 decades of colonial rule, agricultural production stagnated. In between 1860 and 1947, average per capita food grain availability was about 400 grams. On the eve of independence, the literacy rate was 17% of those over the age of 10 years, and life expectancy at birth was only 32.5 years. Indian economy suffered in the interwar years from the problems of agricultural productivity, strain on credit and labor markets, collapse of international trade during Great Depression, and 2 world wars. In Marxian terms, the lack of demand caused by the internal mechanism of capitalist economy, such as low agricultural productivity, abysmally low purchasing power, acted as a constraint on industrialization. The gale of creative destruction blew too strongly over Indian economic base. I shall not go further because I believe my time is up. And so those who are experts here who talk about post-colonial economy, I shall simply say that after independence, just for a summary, India pursued a policy of license permit Raj and also state-guided capitalistic development. It ended up in 1970, ended up in the control of 72 monopoly houses over the Indian economy. Interestingly, Pakistan followed a policy of privatization, and it led, and it also depended upon the state international aid, and it also led towards the rise of 42 families, earlier said 22 families, rise of 42 families that exercised stranglehold over the economy. And as a consequence, we find that in 1980s, there took place massive workers' revolt. It was there in 1960s, from 60s to 1980s. It was there in Bombay in the textile industry that ended the textile industry. It was there in Calcutta in the jute industry, and that ended the growth of the jute industry too, because of all other factors. It was the labor that actually led its imprint on the process of industrialization in South Asia. In Pakistan, we find that the workers and students revolt actually ended the Ayub Khan's regime. And again, here we find workers' imprint on the process of industrialization, and to a certain extent, acted as restraint on any kind of unequal distribution of wealth. In Bangladesh, obviously, this led towards the kind of independence war, and finally, Bangladesh, when it emerged as an independent industrialization, it aimed at the lowest end of the global value chain and operated primarily in the sector of the ready-made garment industry as the chain of the economic growth. And so that is where I shall end my talk here. I would have, if a time permitted, I would have gone to the pattern of industrialization in Nepal from Rana regime in 1936 onwards and the constraints on that, but I shall stop here. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Basu, and hopefully we'll come back to this conversation during the discussion period. And actually, to follow up your presentation, we have Mr. Deepak Gwali, a hydroelectric power engineer from Moscow Energy Institute and a political economist from UC Berkeley. He's an academician of the Nepal Academy of Science and Technology and former chair of Nepal Water Conservation Foundation. He was Nepal's Minister for Water Resources in 2002-03 and has been on the advisory board member of STEPS Center, IDS Sussex, Stockholm World Water Week, UN World Water Assessment Program, as well as US Pacific National Northwest Labs multi-country study, Human Choice and Climate Change. In 2006, he chaired a multi-expert team that reviewed the EU's global water research. He was also a member of an independent external evaluation committee for UNESCO and the Dutch government in 2007, which reviewed institutional arrangements of the UNESCO IHE Institute for Water Education at Delft, and has chaired the review of UNESCO's 6th phase of its International Hydrological Program in 2011. Till recently, he co-chaired Climate Action Network South Asia. His research focus is on the interface between society and resources, mostly water and energy, which he examines from the perspective of cultural theory. He will speak on Nepal's industrialization under the autocratic Rana Panchayat regimes till 1990 and deindustrialization under globalization with the restoration of multi-party democracy in 1990. Over to you.
Thank you. I can be heard, right? Okay. What I'm going to do is actually, as you said, and as Dr. Basu ended his talk with, the industrialization, early industrialization, it's deindustrialization, and speculate on where things will go now from where we are, which is a bit of a mess currently. Industrialization steps were already there in early 20th century till 1990 under what is called less than democratic regimes, the Rana regime and the Panchayat regimes. The first hydropower plant in Nepal was actually set up already in 1911, one of the first in Asia after Darjeeling, I suspect, before China even had one. Now, where is China right now and where are we right now is interesting to speculate. Ropeway, cable cars, soon thereafter, transporting, goods and things like that. Jute mill, match factories, agriculture implements factory, paper factory, shoe factory. These were all set up under the Rana regime and then subsequently the Panchayat regime. These were all paralleled also with the industrialization of our neighbors, China, Mao's China to the north, and Nehru's India. Indeed, most of the factories that I mentioned were actually set up with help from China, the Soviet Union, and others. Now, what happened is that with 1990, restoration of multi-party democracy came with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and China sort of, stepping back from international commitments, as per, I think Deng Xiaoping's idea of bide your time kind of strategy. What happened was there was unbridled privatization then under that globalization kind of wave, and the start of deindustrialization in Nepal. All these factories were quote unquote privatized, but really in effect, they were not privatized, they were shut down, okay? And the land on which they were speculated out for land transaction and things like that. Now, adding to that woe, 5 years after that restoration, the Maoists began their insurgency against multi-party democracy. Incidentally, the Maoist insurgency was not against the monarchy. And with the massive extortion that industrialists and business people suffered, more industries and factories, even the small ones, were starting to close down. Parallelly, the government then, towards 1997-98, 3-4 years into the Maoist uprising, loosened the passport regime in Nepal. Before, to get a passport, you had to come all the way to Kathmandu, and the transaction cost for some villager living far out in the hills of Nepal was just too much. But what the government did, now migration has always been there to India, even to, from the time of Ranjit Singh's army fighting against the British, the Nepalis have always gone out and migrated for jobs. But this was different because with passport easily available in the districts, massive outflow of Nepalis pushed by the Maoist insurgency and pulled by the lure of, better jobs abroad. The unskilled laborers, the unskilled went to the Gulf, Malaysia, Korea, and the skilled ones or the educated ones migrated to Australia and the United States and Europe and other places. It's so stark that a population of 30 million, which is what Nepal is, the estimate is that, not counting India, we have something like 5 million or 6 million abroad, which means just about every family has somebody living abroad. It's that bad. Now, what this has done parallelly is it has not just, now remittances now account for something like 30% of the GDP of Nepal. And the government is completely dependent on revenues of the import taxation right now. Now, parallel with this is a massive decline in agriculture and animal husbandry. There's nobody to farm, there's nobody to take care of the cattle, which means we even import powdered milk from Australia, okay? Now, and agriculture decline has already meant that we are also importing garlic and, coriander leaves from China, Tibet of all the places. Now, why is this happening? It's happening because the political economy of major political parties are, they may call themselves socialist. In fact, all of the ruling parties are right now either socialist or some form of Marxist communist or Maoist. We have a Maoist prime minister right now. Interestingly, they are completely dependent on donations to their parties from comprador bourgeois. So we've got a massive crony capitalism stuff at work here, which does not see much need for industrialization. I mean, if you're even importing, coriander and garlic, and the importing agencies are giving you the donations, it's already telling where you are headed for. Okay. Now, this is leading to this classic Dutch disease syndrome that Kerala and Uttarakhand in India used to suffer from, but I believe they have recovered now. But we are in a dangerous situation because if something happens globally, and these laborers are no longer required in their wherever they've gone to, there might be a serious political upheaval. Now, when the Rana regime started its industrialization way back in the early 1900s, it was primarily driven by the fact that we have a surplus of youth in this country, even in those days. And there was a need to find a livelihood because agriculture could not sustain everybody in the hills. The hills is not possible to do that, which is why they deliberately started this process of industrialization. Now what happens is, where are we headed from? Yes, I got that. Yeah, thanks. Three drivers are going to determine where we go. One is COVID and the Ukraine supply chain breakup. What this is leading also is to a decline in foreign aid as an industry. A colleague of mine in a book that I edited from Routledge has written a very interesting chapter called From Torrent to Trickle to Irrelevance about foreign aid in Nepal. Because if remittance is already dominating your economy, foreign aid amounts to nothing, although Nepal was supposed to be a foreign aid addicted country. In Nepal's case, in addition to these kind of supply chains breakup, we have seen 4 blockades by India: Nehru in 1962, Indira in 1971, Rajiv in 1989, and in Modi's case, in 2015 after our earthquake. Now, this has really shocked the political establishment, but they have not really reacted the way they do. But there is a movement in the country to say that we should be going back to basic necessities manufacturing ourselves. The other driver is the de-dollarization that is underway. Let's not forget, as Karl Polanyi mentions, that markets are not natural. They don't just come up. Markets have always been imposed by strong governments, whether it's in the UK or with the Communist Party of China in China. So with this de-dollarization underway, trading in regional currencies is increasing, and we don't know what that means, especially with China and India, north and south of us. So this might have another major impact here. Chinese investments are already interesting. It's in all kinds of places where tourism, you used to see European tourists, now you see Chinese tourists in Nepal, and Indian tourists. Climate change is the other major driver, and I'll close with this one, because climate change concerns are bringing the issues of water and energy footprints to the forefront now. What we have had in Nepal is vegetables grown locally cannot be sold in the local market, nor milk produced in local market, because they cannot compete with the vegetables from Punjab coming 2,000 kilometers away, burning fossil fuel. Now, there's something very perverse in this kind of globalized economy when this happens. So what climate change is going to force is a major shift to localization in the days ahead, and with a shift from trade in luxuries, trade in necessities to trade in luxuries, as Stavrianos describes in his Global Rift, okay? But I don't think this is going to be an easy road ahead, but I think it's probably inevitable. I'll close with this.
Thank you so much. This was perfect timing. So we'll move on to Mr. Sartaj Khan. He's an independent researcher, a postgraduate of the Department of Geography at the University of Karachi. He began his career as a researcher with the NGO Roots for Equity, where he was commissioned to work on the project Food Security and Women Farmers, supported by the Heinrich Böll Foundation. This project provided him with a valuable opportunity to study the impact of globalization, trade liberalization, and international financial institutions on Pakistan's rural areas and agrarian economy, and the global South in general. Over the years, he has made a significant contribution to the field of journalism, editing Socialist Urdu for more than 10 years and publishing numerous booklets, articles, and op-eds in newspapers, magazines, and journals. His areas of expertise and interest include development, globalization, imperialism, resistance movements, agrarian sociology, Marxism, labor and peasant movements, Islamic movements, urban conflicts and ethnicity, and Pashtun culture and history. Currently, he is working on a trilogy of books, with the first book focusing on the history of Pashtuns in the 20th century. He will speak on Pakistan's industrial growth in crisis. Mr. Sartaj Khan. Can you hear me? Sartaj ji. Okay, I think we may have lost him. Oh no, he's here. Sartaj ji, aapki bari. We are unable to hear you, Sartaj ji.
Are you getting me, madam?
Yeah, now is good.
Okay, I'm going to speak. Okay, thank you, madam. I'm grateful to the organization for gathering experts from South Asian countries. Being a part of this exchange of ideas in a virtual roundtable discussion is inspiring. I will contribute on a topic of great importance related to Pakistan. As my presentation is now limited to 10 minutes, I will provide a shorter version along with key points in my presentation, Pakistan, industrial growth and crisis. Currently, Pakistan is confronted with a situation similar to that experienced by Sri Lanka following the Ukrainian war and global economic and climate crisis. The country is now on the brink of default and has been unable to secure a relief package from International Monetary Fund for nearly 6 months. Notably, the government provides an annual subsidy of $14.4 billion to the elites and corporate sector. The devaluation of currency has benefited the export sector due to decline in exports, while general public is grappling with a 35 inflation rate, unemployment, and food crisis. This will lead to higher poverty rates, increased precarity, and greater inequality. In the South, in the context of new liberalism in South Asia, the concept of deindustrialization and reindustrialization pertain to the adoption of production process comprising productive capital, labor, and raw material in response to internal and external pressures and demand. This transformation will ultimately bring about a substantial shift in the overall trajectory of industrial development itself. Pakistan economy can be analyzed by studying its three main sectors in relation to GDP. The agriculture sector, especially crop production, has seen a decrease in its share. On the other hand, service sector has been growth, while the industrial sector's contribution to GDP has declined. The focus on fostering an export-oriented economy. Are you getting me, madam?
Yes, Sartaji, please continue.
The focus on fostering an export-oriented economy in Pakistan has resulted in several noteworthy consequences, namely the widening of trade deficit, a surge in import bills, inflationary pressure, and call for an escalation in subsidies from business community. To bolster the competitiveness of Pakistan capital in global markets, various initiatives have been undertaken. These include the pursuit of regional competitiveness through provision of energy subsidies, compromises on labor and environmental regulations and laws, and the establishment of favorable business environment to enable Pakistani capital to effectively compete with other countries in South Asian region. However, despite of these efforts, Pakistan still lags behind its regional counterparts, especially Bangladesh and India, in terms of overall economic performance. Over the course of the past 2 decades, Pakistan economic value has doubled, whereas India and Bangladesh achieved almost triple and quadruple growth respectively. In terms of the labor force, Pakistan has a large number of workers migrating from rural areas to urban centers. However, due to limited skill, Pakistani workers fall behind their South Asian counterparts in productivity and competitiveness. Thank you, madam.
Sataji, is it over?
Yes, madam, it is over.
Okay, thank you so much.
It was sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That was that really helps our time actually. So we'll move on to Dr. Anirban Acharya. He's a professor of practice in political science and economics at Lemoyne College, Syracuse, New York. His recent book is titled Markets, Capitalism, and Urban Space in India, Right to Sell. He is a regular panelist in the popular news analysis program called Ivory Tower that is hosted by the Public Broadcasting Services. The title of his presentation is Anxiety of Markets, Informal Enterprises in Neoliberal India. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee, and thank you everyone for hosting this really wonderful panel on South Asia industrialization and deindustrialization. I'm going to quickly share my screen here just to make sure that we are being able to see the slides and going against the academic norm. I have used a colorful first slide. And this is basically, just talk a little bit about this slide. This is basically a person selling masks on the streets of Calcutta. Just to give you an idea about, the kind of the first slide. So I will lay out, I am interested in commodities. I'm interested in global capitalism. My training is in economics and political science, and I teach both subjects. So I was more interested in looking at what I call in my book the second space of capital, right? Like the where final goods and services are sold to a final consumer. One of our first interfaces with capitalism is through commodities, through consumption, through things that we buy in order to survive, in order to lead our lives, whether it be through wants or desires. And I'm kind of interested in looking at how things get to be sold. How do we get to have the commodities that capitalism is built on? So I'm going to quickly go through a snapshot of Indian economic growth. Yes, India has, as one of my previous speakers have pointed out, seen kind of a spectacular growth, surely, from, say, $200 in 2010 US dollars, constant dollars, to about 1,800. And this is real GDP per capita. So this is per capita income on an average of final goods and services, marketable final goods and services. And they are adjusted for inflation, right? So you can see definitely a 300 from 300 to about 1,800, about a 500% growth rate that comes over a span of about 40 to 50 years. So on an average, it's about a 5% growth rate over that time, although that's kind of a synoptic analysis. But if you look at the growth, right, this is GDP per capita. If you look at how it grows, the growth experience of India has been fairly unstable and patchy. Yes, we have periods of long positive growth, but we have these deep recessions, but we also have instabilities over time, as we can see, right? So that's just kind of a snapshot. Looking at unemployment, which is something that I'll be interested in talking about in a moment, we see that, the youth unemployment, 15 to 24-year-olds that want to have a job but cannot have one, have increased quite amount, like 25%, during COVID, about 30%, right? But the unemployment in India has kind of remained stable over time, but this is mainly from the total labor force, not just 15 to 24. But as you can see, India has experienced high unemployment, and especially a very rising youth unemployment over the last, 10, 15 years, especially when we have the liberalization in India in the 90s. Now, I'm going to talk about the informal economy here, right? Now, we talk about industrialism, we talk about industries, we talk about factories, but how much it is really comparable in terms of in terms of registration by the state, in terms of what the state can see. So increasingly in the political economy literature, scholars have been talking about for quite a long time now about understanding this formal informal kind of difference within the economy. So the way the Indian scholars work on this, there is a difference, right? So there is the enterprise side, and these are unorganized sector, which consists of mainly unincorporated private enterprises owned by individuals. So you can just mainly think it of like small businesses, right? That not necessarily are always registered. They have less than 10 workers. And in many cases, they are not separate from the individual that is running it. They're unincorporated. On the employment side, we can see that workers that produce legal goods and services, but they kind of engage in operations that are not registered, and they are they are not protected by fiscal, health, and labor laws, right? So like in US or in Western countries, we have unemployment insurance, we have social security, we have Medicaid, we have Medicare, all that kind of stuff, social protection of labor. The workers that don't have it are called informal workers, right? So having that argument in mind, if we look forward, we will see that Indian industry is dominated by informal work. This kind of this cannot be really compared to Western nations and ideas of industrial labor and labor experience in that manner, because the larger part of the economy, as you can see here, 90.7% of the labor force, right? And you can look at the numbers here from previous years, 435 million people, which is about 115 million more people than that is present in United States. So you can see the vastness of this, right? 90.7% of that labor force is informal. They don't have social protection. They don't have social security, Medicare, Medicaid, any kind of unemployment insurance, any kind of health benefits, and so on and so forth, right? So kind of moving on from there, we can look at this idea of neoliberalism, right? The neoliberalism kind of talks about this market principle, the idea that markets are extremely important, and then the state should take an activist role in protecting markets. And the other part is the social expenditure should be reduced completely, and countries should always strive to grow and grow and grow and grow. I point out, especially with the terms of hawkers movements, that, and especially in the terms of deindustrialization in India, that these neoliberal policies are incompatible. They kind of form an unholy trinity where all three cannot be maintained together. And as you can see in West Bengal, where my field work is, kind of goes through this massive deindustrialization. And again, I'm not going to go through this. I will share the slides if you want to look at it or write to me about it, right? And we see violence against these sellers. So, massive protests of street vendors and so on. So I come to this question, and again, here, Eric Garner, Alton Sterling, to give you a US perspective, these were two people selling stuff on the street when they were murdered by US policemen, right? So I'm interested in seeing about this anxiety of neoliberalism, about its own brainchild, which is this kind of markets, and kind of look at how neoliberal economic policies goes against market forces as seen by hawkers and so on and so forth. So in my study, I kind of find out a couple of interesting things that, the problem is that you want to have high growth, right? Great. India, other South Asian countries, they want to have high growth. So at least in the case of retail, which I study, service sector, right? You have to have a tremendous amount of investment, large industrialized retail, like we see in Walmart, like we see in Amazon. But in order to do that, you need a skilled labor force, right? To some extent, a labor force that kind of believes that this will be a better job. But because that informal unemployment, right? Even if you join these organized sector, your employment remains completely informal. It completely remains precarious. So people don't want to join that organized sector. So what happens is that the state kind of enters into this internecine struggle with people who actually participate in markets, but are unwilling to join the organized sector of the markets because the organized sector doesn't provide any more employment benefits than the unorganized sector. So you have the kind of right to sell movement. But on the broader sense, to finish up, the trend in India is that it is about formalization of spaces of selling, right, through corporate retail and so on. But it also comes with an informalization of spaces of employment, or spaces of employment rather than unemployment, which I wrongly wrote here. And that's the kind of tussle that will be going on in future. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Acharya. This was very interesting, and I have questions later. So now we move on to Dr. Atri Majumdar. She's Associate Professor, Social Sciences at the National Law School of India University in Bangalore. She is an anthropologist of South Asia. Her research broadly concerns the categories of time, space, capital, sacred geography, and more recently, the nature of belonging in an urban industrial hinterland, published by Routledge in 2019. Her presentation is titled A Tale of Two Strikes, Anecdotes on Deindustrialization in Eastern India. Over to you, Dr. Majumdar.
Thanks, Piyusha. Thanks, Indranil, for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here and be in conversation with several friends and colleagues. Let me just share my screen very quickly. I'm going to share. It's not going to be a broad macro kind of paper. It's going to be a paper that I share two stories with, and I tell the tale of decline and obsolescence through these two stories of strikes, or what in India, in Hindi especially, is called a hartal or a hortal in Bangla. In this presentation, I will share two stories of strikes from the eastern province of India, which is called West Bengal, bordering Bangladesh and bordering the Bay of Bengal, as many of you here might know. These stories are stories of little heroes in a district called Howrah on the west bank of the Hooghly, on the edges of the colonial capital city of Kolkata. These stories arise from my ethnographic research in the region, which led to my first book, Time, Space, and Capital in India. I'm reiterating these stories on this platform on the topic of deindustrialization to illustrate that a community gets infused with the speed and exhilaration of capital when it lives close to structures and machinations of industry. These structures are often debilitating, but they are simultaneously ways of inhabiting larger worlds, wider scales, longer timelines, and especially a strong genre of political practice surrounding factory-based labor. Howrah has steadily experienced deindustrialization since the 1980s, especially even before, but more strongly from the 1980s with the failure of jute and engineering industries, and more rapidly in the early 2000s. In this context, I speak of labor movements and labor politics that were risking becoming obsolete practices alongside the industries and factories that they were operating in. This paper thus is about obsolescence and the whole repertoire and genre of political practices of strikes becoming obsolete. My last fight will be against God himself, Baba Bholanath. I will fight this fight until the last drop of my blood is shed, says Gayatri Mukherjee, who had just come out of a 7-day Amoron Onoshon, which means a fast unto death, a hunger strike. This hunger strike was for casual labor at the Howrah District Hospital. These laborers went by designation of special attendants. They were hired by the patient's family, but operated out of hospital premises, suddenly supplementing the services of government nurses. They earned 70 rupees a day. In the Howrah case, the MLA had shown some sympathy. He had known Gayatri Mukherjee since he was a young man as a fellow supporter of the Indian National Congress. The order mandating that they be given permanent status had come from the Congress leader Ajit Panja back in the day. Gayatri Mukherjee was planning a mass dharna of statewide attendance in May 1990 in Dharmatala when I first met her. In 1990 being the earlier part of the struggle, but when I first met her, she was planning this dharna. If the police arrest them, let them. Better for them to eat jail food rather than die of starvation like this. She took me to the union office, which was housed at what looked like the bottom of a staircase. There was a man lying on the bed who got up as we entered. Inside, we sat on the bed. The walls were covered with colored prints of Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, Subhash Bose, Nehru, and a nationalist canon added to the Bengali one of Ramakrishna, Sharoda, Ma Sharoda, etc. Gayatri Mukherjee, a frail, bespectacled woman who occupied that shed under the staircase in the courtyard of the Howrah Hospital, was the General Secretary of the State Health Special Attendants Joint Action Committee. She was the special attendant at the Howrah Hospital in the 1960s. and they were working toward under the pitiable conditions at a daily wage of 2 rupees a day back in the day. They had to clean the bodies of patients, bathe them, and so on, and call the doctor when needed. They worked 12-hour shifts and sometimes had nothing to eat. This organization, the Special Attendant Joint Action Committee, to which the Adit Panda had lent his support, became, and being the health minister at the time, casual workers at hospitals used to get 5 rupees a day. And during his time, she says, their pay was increased to 33 rupees a day, while the SA's pay was 33 rupees a day, while the SA's pay was increased to 24 rupees a day for Mufassal hospitals. Ajit Panja accepted their demands of giving some SAs permanent status. 20% of the SAs and 10% of casual workers would become permanent. When the left front came to power, they started kicking special attendants out. Gayatri said they took the case to High Court and the left front didn't give them permanent jobs. In 1981, she went on a hunger strike unto death at the SSKM hospital in Calcutta. Her son died out of medical negligence at a reputed Calcutta hospital. She wanted to protest, but people said, your son will not come back. What is the point? She raised the BC Roy, Bidhan Chandra Roy statue outside her union office in memory of her son. She regretted that the same Mamata Banerjee, who had once attended their 1990 convention, was the chief minister today of West Bengal. Very soon, they were supposed to petition to an MLA, and judging from his response, they were going to take a stand, possibly get to the streets. There were approximately 10,000 SAs, special attendants, all over the state. From 1981, recruiting as special attendants had stopped. They had demanded that the convention of jobs passing on to sons and wives if the employee died in service be applied to them as well. Either ways they should be given a pension without being made permanent, or someone from the family be given that job or be recruited somewhere else. Next story. Pranab Chakraborty, who I will now call PC, sat on a bed in their house in Puleshwar in Howrah. He asked the lady of the house to get me some muri and chai, muri being puffed rice. He said we should delay the conversation until we finished eating. I munched away, feeling awkward. He began the Kanoria jute mill story. The Kanoria workers were part of a rail overload rail sabotage, while some of PC's colleagues were traveling in a Bombay mail train that got stopped by the overload near Pashkura. These colleagues used to run a newspaper called Motok Prakash, which means expression of opinion. They went to inquire about the situation at the Kanoria jute mill gate in Bauria for a story in Motok Prakash. A few days later, they accompanied a couple of Kanoria workers to PC's house, asking his assistance to form a new union. PC told the story from a point of view of reluctance at getting involved, while the workers were keen for his participation. He said there were already 5 or so unions supported by different parties in Kanoria. There was no question of starting another union. He disagreed with the strategy of multiplicity of unions. The rail overload, rail sabotage was spontaneously carried out by workers who were desperate with the workings of the various unions who were in sync with their owners. PC became interested in the matter as the workers involved were Bengali and local people. In the context of plastic being environmentally harmful, jute was becoming a great potential as a packing material that was natural. PC went to Kanoria and sat with the congregation of about 50 workers and asked them if they could get a written statement from at least 51% workers of the Kanoria jute mill, affirming their willingness to join such a union. About 70% of the Kanoria jute mill workers joined the union that he constituted in November 1992. One day, a union functionary was beaten up. PC heard this and went to the Kanoria jute mill gate. He realized that the workers were getting excited and this could lead to violent strikes between them and the goons. No one had gone to work in the subsequent shifts. He called a meeting and then said the workers should hold on to their anger and realize that the enemy had fled in the field. Sorry. So this story, I'll finish very quickly, sorry, is about a rail sabotage that goes awry. They're picked up by the police and the Jyoti Basu gets involved. and ultimately they're let off. The workers are let off by the police. They withdrew the Oborod in February 1994, and the mill did not reopen. They started another high hunger strike. The government picked them up, and took them to the SSKM hospital in Calcutta. The community kitchens carried on in 54 villages, where around 2,000 people ate every day. I'll just end by saying this, that these are small heroes of deindustrialization. They know that their struggle is fruitless. Is this madness, I ask? My answer, my intuition lies in the heart of our horizon of imaginations of potentialities of resistance that must be an articulation of a form of correction of past or present wrong, or crafting of a better future. Desperation, nostalgia, abyss are all words that pop up at the edges of the imaginative horizon of resistance, that is the ambition to correct a current form of rule or power. The familiar template of resistance is one that articulates a goal or an ambition or chalk out a destiny. But what of that garbled scribbling, the noises of madness? Madness as the realm of estrangement from reason, from legibility of patterns and structures of thinking. I'll just close by saying Chakraborty and his rabble-rousing gang are not mad by any stretch of vocabulary or imagination. They are stubborn. They bring along a temporal logic of certain industries' obvious descent into obsolescence. They corporeally embrace the factory, the machines. The structure of their strike is very much the display of bodies and objects. Tool down rail oborods, they claim short-term triumphs. They expect their eventual loss. And yet they submit to charisma and brace themselves for some heroism. They do this by making their protest a choreography that is tangible, visible in the perceptive field of the mill owner and the agents of the state. Thank you. I'm sorry I took so long.
Thank you, Dr. Mojumdar. This is an interesting scalar shift in the conversation now. And we have two more presentations left. Before I move on to present the next speaker, I also want to welcome you to start putting your questions in the chat if you already have burning questions to share. So we are moving on to Azizul Russell, who's a doctoral student at the Department of History and Classical Studies at McGill University. He is working under the supervision of Dr. Bashu. His PhD research focuses on the history of the working classes of East Pakistan, erstwhile known as East Bengal and presently Bangladesh. He explores both the social structures and forms of consciousness of urban working classes, with particular emphasis on the 1960s, globally a turbulent and insurgent period. His research is generously funded by the Peter Kundell Fellowship and the Department of History and Classical Studies. He completed his BA and MA from Leiden University, the Netherlands, with Encompass Fellow Scholarship. Apart from his primary research project, he is interested in African history, Marxism, and post-colonial theory. Azizul's presentation is titled Women, Textile, and Precarious Workers and Social Mobility in Bangladesh between 1990 and 2023. Over to you, Azizul.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chatterjee and all. Thank you for organizing such an important webinar. So I'm happy to present here. I would like to share my slide, although I have very few slides, but I would like to share it. I think I am able to share my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes. You can switch to the presenter view if you want.
Yeah, presenter view is like this. Yeah. So thank you very much. So today I'll be talking about actually women textile worker and precarious worker, particularly the women workers. So I have listened to other presenters, and these were absolutely good presentations. But so far I have observed that most of the presenters talked um, about not about the female or working women. So I would like to actually focus a bit on this. A very interesting topic because the industrialization and reindustrialization. First, I think we need to understand that why, deindustrialization actually occur and why the reindustrialization and what are the characteristics of reindustrialization. So if you focus on particular development in Bangladesh, perhaps this micro study or really regional study will give us some perspective. So in the photo you can see this photo was taken by one of my comrades from Communist Party of Bangladesh. So this was during the COVID when these A1BD garment workers, they didn't get their wages for 4 to 5 months. And you can imagine that how hard it to go through without wages. So they were actually protesting, they're organizing mobilization, and women actually they played very important part in this kind of mobilization, in particularly in the textile industry. There are textile workers are predominant in Bangladesh. Women textile workers. Why I will just analyze it a bit later. But I would like to, in this paper, I would like to argue that women workers, particularly the textile and also the precarious, they played a very important role in social mobility in this new reindustrialized space or even informal work. So they have a kind of collaboration. A collaboration means the women textile workers and precarious workers. So they this collaboration happened particularly in the neighborhood, the place where they live, not the factory space. So they work. You can see that they work in different sector, like women who work in the textile industry or the precarious worker. Women worker mainly they are cleaning workers, nurse, and etc. So mainly women actually they worked in previously they worked in tea garden before let's say in the colonial period or during the Pakistani post-colonial state, or even today there are some women who works in tea garden. But now in present condition the women basically work in textile industry and also in the precarious work. So as I told that we need to understand that why this reindustrialization happened. For instance, industry like garment, it developed in the 1979 and it expanded particularly after 1990s, and Bangladesh now became perhaps the second largest country in this garment export. So as we need to understand this, if we actually go through Robert Brenner's work on the agricultural structure in Europe, we'll find that Robert Brenner in his essay wrote that actually the capitalist competition occurred also between two capitalists. So who will exist? Those who can actually improve the mechanization and also the conditions of the production of capitalist reproduction. If you see that in these reindustrialized industries, what they do in Bangladesh, actually the capitalists, they are not able to, or they are not that much capable to improve, the sophisticated machines that actually will lead them to compete with other global uh, global in the global capitalists. So what they do, they try to actually they try to maximize their profit by exploiting their workers. So women are, one of them. So it's not that much. It's comparatively easy to actually exploit women workers. Women workers basically they come from the lower or lower middle class family. They need to work to sustain. If you see that women workers, they in Bangladesh in textile, there are around 4 million garment workers, but women are 58%. So one of the reasons for recruiting women is to to get maximum work from them and to actually exploit. It's easy to exploit them compared to their male fellows. And women in precarious work actually, as I told you, they work mainly in the cleaning sector, nursing, and some informal economy, like they work as a household worker. So these women workers, actually, they play a predominant role in the mobilization, in the mobilization in the protest to gain to achieve the rights and benefits. For instance, this is a photo of a women leader in the neighborhood of Dhaka, whom I interviewed during the COVID. So she's not a garment worker, but she is a cleaning worker. They developed a vernacular organization there as vernacular workers organization in this neoliberal times play a very important role than trade union, as Shabbashashi Bhattacharya, Rana P. Bihal in their book, The Vernacularization of Labor Politics, in the edited book, actually they wrote that in the new context of new liberalism, the vernacular organization began to play a very important role in labor mobilization. So what we see that these women workers, actually they founded a organization which is called the Busti Bashi Union in Bengali, what is called in English, we can translate it the Slum Dwellers Union. So thank you very much. I will wrap it up very soon. So I would like to argue that these women who work in the textile industry and also in other informal sectors, they play an important role in the labor mobilization in urban context, and also they created a link between urban and rural space, because they move back and forth, and the money, the wages they earn, it actually helped to support their families, extended families in rural areas. So thank you very much, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. My time is over. I would like to talk a bit more, but it's okay. You can ask me any question if you have later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azizul. I'm sure there will be questions later, and we would be able to come back to your presentation. And now our final presentation is by Dr. Indranil Chakraborty. He's a Horizon postdoctoral fellow in the Department of History at Concordia University. His research interests include media technology, labor, and South Asia. As a part of the Depot Research Project, his research on Sears Canada examines how deindustrialization and reindustrialization in the North American retail sector are changing the laboring population's everyday life experiences. Besides the study on Sears Canada, Canada's bankruptcy in Canada, Indranil's presentation is presently working on two other projects on deindustrialization and reindustrialization research. One is exploring the reason and consequences of Indian steelmakers' acquisition of companies such as Chorus, Arcelor, Algoma Steel, and Minnesota Steel that provided the lifeline to the steel industry in the global north. The second is the transformation story of the Bata Shoe Company operation in India from labor welfareism to labor precarity. Dr. Chakraborty will speak on labor welfareism to labor precarity, the story of Bata in Batanagar, India.
Thank you, Piyusha. So it is about the restructuring of Bata's shoe business in India, which is both a deindustrialization and reindustrialization story. Deindustrialization through downsizing, outsourcing the production of most of its brands and monetizing its assets. And retail became the mainstay of Bata's business. So how did this happen? The Batanagar's journey, which was once the largest shoemaking factory, from a booming shoe production unit to the present state of rickety existence, I think will tell this story of transformation. Bata began its first factory in India at Batanagar near Calcutta in 1934, 5 years before the World War II broke out and 13 years before India gained independence. Bata began selling shoes in India in 1925-26, exporting from its parent factory in Zlin, Czechoslovakia. Thomas Bata founded the Calcutta factory. He had set up factories in Germany, England, in Netherlands, Poland, and other countries by 1931. Thomas Bata did not live to see Batanagar. He died in an air crash in 1933. The Bata built the Calcutta factory and township with staff quarters, sports ground, social clubs, a school, and a hospital on 324 acres. Production began in August 1936. The factory would soon become the largest shoe factory in Asia, producing 29 million pairs in 1990. The ideas of welfare capitalism drove Bata's shoe business. Bata created for its workers with residential quarters close enough to walk, to work, and walk home for lunch. The company funded and maintained a grocery store, a recreation hall, clubs, a stadium, a hospital, and schools for employees' sons and daughters. In 1934, Bata had just 334 employees, including 70 Czechoslovakians. By 1944, the company headcount had grown to around 7,500 employees. In 70s and 80s, during its heydays, Batanagar factory had 10 to 13,000 workers. And today, the factory has few thousand workers, predominantly contract workers, with few benefits for their future life. By early 2000, the company realized that running a subsidized township colony was not possible in the current business environment. The 1990s liberalization policies of the government, Indian government, threw significant challenges to Bata's employees. Welfare-based, inward-looking business operation, with the opening of the regulated Indian market to foreign investment and technology and a spurt in homegrown footwear brands, Bata certainly started to experience the heat of competition, to which it was unaccustomed and for which it was unprepared. In the broader global context, the coming of globalization and neoliberal economic ideas in the 1980s of just-in-time production, flexible labor market, and free trade to quicken the production, distribution, consumption cycle which would valorize capital at the shortest possible time limit, Bata's made business philosophy of welfare capitalism obsolete. So here we can see on the slides the old Bata, the township. And then from 1990 onwards, it was time to monetize the company's resources developed over the last 4 decades, and Batanagar's sprawling estate was a fast asset on the block. So you can see the workers protesting, and it's interesting to say that unlike in other factories, here Bata, we had only one union. So all the political parties, they didn't open their own union units there, all came together, and Bata's union is kind of one union in the factory. So that helped the Bata workers to fight against the company's neoliberal policies, corporate policies. Unlike in other trades, the Batanagar factory had just one trade union. The workers put forward their demands and fought for their rights when Bata downsized the factory and started outsourcing the production in 1990s. The trade union movement within Bata was powerful, and there was one union, but it had representation from all parties. There was a joint committee, and majority voted in election would preside over the union. The company's VRS, voluntary retirement scheme, in 1980s and 1990s reduced the strength of the union members. The workforce reduction and promotion of a section of employees to the officers cadre without a substantial pay increase weakened the union. Once the union had lost its power, it was easy for the company to implement in plans. In 2004, Bata India signed a joint venture with Calcutta Metropolitan Group to develop a satellite township named Calcutta Riverside on 262 acres at its Batanagar location. Leaving aside 47 acres for the Bata factory, the housing project will have 10,000 apartments for middle-income families, retail and recreation facilities. The project has also 9 golf course based around premium residential villas across 80 acres. There is an international riverfront promenade with activities, points of interest, and F&B. School and postgraduate educational centers across 10 acres, a modern hospital over 25 acres. The total project was estimated to 1,500 crore to be completed in 5 years. The post-war boom made Bata one of the largest global footwear companies. Globalization, the advent of virtual technology changed the value creation game, with big companies such as Bata opting for asset-light existence in which outsourced production fits the brand and no factories. You don't have to have factories, and so you don't have to have any labor costs. So what happened to Bata? Bata still has 4 factories in India producing shoes. However, 80% of the shoes that Bata sells through its around 1,400 retail stores are outsourced. The employees who sell shoes in the retail stores are all outsourced employees with a salary of around 16,000 for working 8 to 10 hours a day on a 5-day week. And there are no benefits, says one of the retail store employees. Compared to the employees' earlier existence, where Bata's provided financial security, created cocoons for its workers with on-site residential quarters and an 8-hour workday. Now it is just a story of everyday life without any benefits. So the stories of monetizing assets and restructuring a business process had started at Batanagar have become an all-India Bata phenomena. Bata opts for an asset-like existence in which outsourced production fits the brand. It is both deindustrialization and reindustrialization at the same time. Fewer workers produce fewer shoes in Bata factories, and rest of the market demand is met by small and medium enterprises with minimum accountability to workers' welfare. The company's retail business handles marketing and selling shoes with cheap outsourced labor. The story of Bata in the last 9 decades exemplifies the limits of welfare capitalism. So this is a kind of transformation story of one of the India's showcase, industrialization showcase that happened in the last 3 decades. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indra. And now we are at the end of the presentation, all the presentations. So I would like to invite people who've joined us from different parts of the world to ask questions or thoughts. So I already see Stephen's hand is up, so please go ahead.
Well, that was a brilliant session. I'm going to definitely encourage my students to watch this on YouTube, and I think it's such an important addition to the conversation around deindustrialization. And so I was thinking about like how the concept of deindustrialization really emerged in a certain moment in a certain place, right? Like 1970s, 80s, North America, Western Europe. When Dr. Basu was talking, I was about the the debate around colonialism. I was reminded of like how in Canada we were very influenced by sort of the Latin American dependency theory, and how that emphasis on like how industry was made to close, right? So that there's like a, it's not inevitable, it's a cause of decisions being made and so on, and so how left nationalism was very important, right, to the the construction of the concept. So I guess my question is for all of you. Is deindustrialization, is that a useful concept for us in the South Asian context? Is this something that is useful? And then I guess, like if you are working with that concept, and you are clearly, how does it differ, right? How does it need to be adjusted, right? I was thinking of Indranil's last point around outsourcing, and how, like the old debates around branch plants and multinational corporations, right, have really been sort of shifted towards, commodity chains and so on. But anyways, I sort of a question there, but it was just a fantastic session. Learned a lot. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So let's see. Please feel free to respond to this question, and maybe then we move on to Gabriela. So whoever wants to go up first, please unmute yourself and speak.
If I can go quickly, I think it's a great question about this concept of deindustrialization. When I think about it, I myself am confused in certain ways, right? Because a couple of things, right? One, we talk about Europe being post-industrial. I mean, is it though? Because the finance and the service industry, these are massive industries with trillions of dollars worth of revenue that have developed in these places, right? You have cubicles of people working 8 hours a day looking at computer algorithms to make you money, right? So that is a quintessentially industry, right? HBO has a series called Industry, which is about the finance industry, right? So when I think about South Asia, I like to think more in terms of industrial transformation rather than deindustrialization, and also to think about these industries are not comparable. A person working in Ford in Detroit has different kinds of social protections, different kinds of ability to have social safety net than a person working, say, in Sri Lanka or in India or Myanmar, right? So I do think, first of all, India produces, Indian industrial output has been quite large. But what I, again, selfishly want to point out that, much of this idea is about the formal and informal part of the economy. Vast swaths of Indian economy is not even touched by, state enumeration, modern labor laws. And the transformation has happened. It has moved from, right, like maybe large scale factory products, jute, cotton, to more, industrialization of retail, industrialization of services, and kind of this atomization of labor. So I think that's a good question. We need to kind of think and theorize, what does deindustrialization really mean, or should we just call it industrial transformation in that sense?
I saw Dr. Bashu's hand was up to respond to Stephen's question.
Your mic, Dr.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
I just thought that, and since Anirban has already intervened in this process, in answering the question, I think the term deindustrialization is a politically loaded term for historians, because in the colonial context there is a huge debate, and that is actually derived from first it originated in the late 19th century context, whereby economic nationalists like Dadabhai Nauroji and others developed the idea of deindustrialization to indicate the decline of the cotton textile industry. And second, reincarnation of the concept of deindustrialization came after reading the Latin American dependency theories, which Professor Hai has referred to. So that is the two kind of ways the idea of deindustrialization is being conceptualized. But the basic thing is this, that deindustrialization in South Asian context as a concept, Anirban has pointed out the difference between the informal and formal sector. In fact, the idea of the difference between informal and formal sector is not at all very clear, because Mark Holmstrom, who first wrote about this subject and has already indicated that what is formal sector in India is also an informal sector, because there are thousands of workers were engaged in what Azizul Russell talked about in precarious labor without any kind of social net, social safety net protection. On the other hand, there is a kind of, say, in South Asian context, there is a continuity of a small space economy, which is basically, Doug Haynes has talked about it, which is basically refers to a kind of power loom and the production of the cotton textile, etc., which is very large. But on the other hand, there definitely took place a decline in the factory-based production, if we roughly indicate deindustrialization by that. And I think in 1980s, which Atrey has been referred to in the context of West Bengal, but that is also the case in Maharashtra. And it is labor which played a very critical role in this context. Particularly in Maharashtra, there took place massive strikes. I mean, those who knew and see the movie Albert Pinto Ka Gussa Kyun Aata Hai, why Albert Pinto becomes angry. And it is about 1984 strike led by Dutt Samant, and that actually ended the Bombay cotton textile industry and Ahmedabad cotton textile industry, Kanpur cotton textile industry, Gujarat cotton textile industry in other parts of Gujarat. So there is a definite decline in factory-based production in India, at least in South Asia, in India, at least in the 1980s. And this had led towards a different kind of industrialization through service sector, and also through small scale production, and also through what Anirban has talked about, second space, that is the retail kind of production. And this is reflected in, I believe, in Dr. Chakraborty's presentation. Indranil has talked about the decline of the Bata, but Bata is symptomatic of the larger decline of various kinds of experiments with welfare labor economics. And that is a kind of global picture. It's not 1980s is the global picture of transformation from the from factory-based industrialization to other kinds of industrialization. I would like to point out two things, and one is very interesting point raised by Dr. Garwali. It's about the remittance-driven economy. I mean, in Bangladesh, to some extent in India, particularly in Kerala, and in other parts of India, remittances and the selling of labor by the migrant workers in different, advance or a kind of lucrative job in a market, labor market, etc., is actually financing the kind of the economic boom that Bangladesh is a Satraj Khan talked about in the context of Bangladesh, etc., it is actually driven by the remittance economy. And this is also true about in the case of Nepal, which is brought out so brilliantly. And in the case of Philippines, etc., there are various other factors involved in it. So when we talk about industrialization and reindustrialization, we have to include labor question, gender question, and the broader question is this, that how capitalism is the state actually inventing the market laws, etc., and playing a critical role in this process. And this is in alliance with the larger industrial and corporate houses.
Thank you so much, Dr. Basu. I very quickly wanted to say that Dr. Acharya has to leave a little early. So if you have specific questions for him, maybe we can get that first. And meanwhile, I think Indra wanted to respond to.
Yeah, so Anirban, I have one question regarding the informal and formal economy in India. So there was a study by SBI during the pandemic, which says that the informal sector in India is shrinking based on the data of Employees Provident Fund Organization. I don't know whether you are aware of that study and the EPFO data. And that's one part. And second is that obviously, I believe you are aware of Ayushman Bharat, which is kind of health benefits to the families who are from the poor families who are below the poverty line. So how do you kind of explain this kind of things in your understanding of informal economy in India?
I think that's a great question, Indranil. So let me respond in really two quick points here. One is that, yes, the informal sector or informal employment. So you have to divide in two parts, right? One is the sectoral definition, which is the enterprise level, right? Whether the enterprise are incorporated or not, which makes it the units themselves unorganized or informal. And then you have the employment side where the labor doesn't have proper labor protections. I don't know about the SBI report, but the latest 2017-2018 report that from the NSSO rounds, 68th round, it shows that a very minuscule drop in informal employment, which is about from 92 to 90% of the labor force. And yes, look, there would be important, the social service aspect that, some kind of social safety net for the poor. All I'm saying is that, this neoliberal principle, right? One, that you need to grow as a country, right? Period. That you need to compete with other nation states to be this growth powerhouse. Second is kind of reduce social welfare as much as you can, social expenditure, and another one being that you have to be a market activist state, not the laissez-faire where you kind of leave the markets on its own, but no, you actually fashion society legally on basis of competition and markets. What I'm saying is that India would not be able to do all these three, right? It either has to create a better labor force in order to create a bigger growth path. So it needs to kind of spend more in social services, in which case it cannot live up to the neoliberal principles in that sense, or it can reduce social services, think of a very high growth path with massive levels of retail, Walmart, and so on and so forth. But then they have to strangle these other market forces and retail market, right? So it kind of becomes an impossible trinity. Kind of a difficulty to have these three things. And the way I saw it is that when I asked hawkers and street vendors, they were like, look, I want a job. I want a government job, right? I want a good private sector job. But when I go and work for, say, Reliance Fresh or Spencer's, my labor is completely undignified and I don't get paid that much either, right? So why am I going to, go to that job? And other higher jobs are not available to me because I'm not that educated, right? And I think Rejan Sen puts out a very good about Indian inequality, a recent book, which looks at kind of this lack of social spending. So kind of to answer your question, yes, India and other countries like India would find to kind of juggle with these three neoliberal principles. Either they have to attack the market, or they have to increase social spending, or they have to settle for lower than 10%, 11% growth fantasy. They can't have all three together. And that's maybe something that I want to kind of, kind of hashing out in my work.
Thank you, Dr. Acharya and Indra. Actually, I think Atri, Dr. Mojumdar, she had a response to Stephen's question. So if you would like to go.
Shall I speak?
Please.
Just picking off of what Anirban was saying in terms of industrial transformation, it occurred to me that industrial transformation is basically re-territorialization of the structures of industry. The urban sociologist Saskia Sassen uses this term in her early 2000s scholarship, where she says that there's a de-territorialization, like de-territorialization of industry, where you don't see factories anymore in the global north, especially in America, but you see that the centers of money that draw from the revenue of industries remain there. And the structures of industry then re-territorialized to the global South, Asia, Africa, North America. And in deindustrialization means basically this, that the visible, tangible structures disappear from the field of vision, especially in the global north. Where do they go? They go to pockets in Bangladesh or India or Nepal or wherever. The second thing I want to say is I was remembering David Harvey's very early work in the 1980s, Limits to Capital, where he is pointing out that there can't be endless growth in any industry. And what any industry does, the logic of capital does within an industrial ballpark is that it attacks itself, which means that its profit rates start declining or plateauing. When that plateau occurs, it's only sensible for the capitalist to withdraw his capital and reinvest it either in a different country or in a different industry or in a different technology for the same industry. So he will start manufacturing either from textile, he will go to finance, or from textile, he will go to textile in Azerbaijan, or he will go to textile with a different technological expertise within the same industry. But he will pull apart, he will disintegrate the current arrangement of industry, and deindustrialization means basically recalibration of logics of capital. And given these two things, what we can say about deindustrialization in India is that we cannot understand the logics, at least in the logical apparatus kind of way, we cannot understand the logics that drive it within a national or a regional perspective. We can get stories like Bhatanagar or Spencer or Bhauda, which illustrate the larger theoretical arguments at work, but we cannot understand within a national framework. We have to, kind of like this kind of world systems argument, or a kind of like center periphery kind of argument has to be recalibrated and rethought of to understand where India plugs into the global supply chains of capital. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mojumdar. And Gabriela has a question, but I wanted to ask if Azizul has a response to Stephen's question. If so, then we go with Azizul first, and then I will ask Gabriela to unmute herself.
Thank you very much. Actually, I would like to, thank you very much. Actually, I would like to also comment on Professor Acharya's understanding of industrialization and industrialization. So what Professor Atri already actually explained quite well, but I would like to add something. So, the transformation of industrialization, what Professor Acharya mentioned, actually, deindustrialization means here, I think, for example, what Walter Rodney in the case of Africa, talked about that. So Europe is not industrializing Africa. What happened in Pakistani period in Bangladesh? There were some few industries, but the capital was in Pakistan's hand. What happened in Africa? So capital was actually in Europe's or the colonizers' hand. What happened today is that what Mike Davis quite well wrote in his book, Planet of Slums. So they actually made, South Asia or the third world country as the periphery where, they actually got all this production, but the capital of what Atri already mentioned, the capital actually more capital is a handoff mainly in the Western multinational companies. Actually, they make the profit. So, for example, the difference between new industrialization and what Indonesian and others talk about industrialization and deindustrialization, what they call is different kind of industrialization where you see they do not give all these opportunities that the old industrialization old character of industries gave. For instance, in Bangladesh case, Adamji or Karnopuli, these industries would have workers' quarter. But in new form of industries, what Professor Acharya is saying, that this is actually these new outsourcing industries, they will not give you this kind of opportunities to the workers. And actually, I also like to some extent agree with Acharya differently. Actually, industrialization is going on, but it's differently. Yeah, it's not quite completely deindustrialization as we are saying, but differently industrializations where what Atri already explained. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Azizul. Unfortunately, Gabriela had to step out, but she left the question with Gab. So would you like to share?
Yeah, it wasn't so much a question, but I'll just read it out loud. She said that she wants to thank all the presenters. It was very stimulating, and she saw many parallels with the Chilean process of industrialization and deindustrialization and neoliberal transformation since the 1980s. So she just wanted to say thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Gab. Indra, you would want to speak?
Yeah, so I believe that the interesting part of understanding what is industrialization and what is deindustrialization is based on how we define industry and industry. In fact, yesterday when I was preparing for my for this session, I was talking to my colleague Elliot, and then Gab and Piyusha was also there, and they were telling me that is it not that government industry is industry and it's industrialization? Yeah, they're perfectly right. That's an industrialization. But when we talk of industrialization, we are talking about industrial revolution, and then we are talking about heavy industries that created the modern industrial nation state, like the steel, like the car industry, all this, and the engineering, all this kind of thing. So in India, what happened post 60s, and economists are more or less agree to this, that there's been stagnation in this heavy industry part. And then the transformation has happened in post 80s, when we have the Uber culture, Uber manufacture, Uber industry, and the garments, and then the IT services. That's a big thing. And Bangladesh has that government production. But what has happened, and we can see in the Bata's case, Bata being used to produce shoes, and Batanagar used to be the largest shoe manufacturing unit in South Asia, not in South Asia, sorry, in Asia. And today we are seeing only few thousands are working in Batanagar, and Bata has transformed itself into a kind of retail company. But what happened is that there is a reindustrialization, like the case in Bata or in the case of governments. So people, the workers are now working, but with very few benefits. and they practically becoming belonging to the informal sector, as one even said. So this transformation, there is a deindustrialization from heavy industries to industry which is service sector industry, but most of the service sector industries create a precarious labor. So this transformation, I think, is important to understand the South Asian deindustrialization process.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Dr. Washington.
Well, I just would like to say that when we talk about global industrialization and deindustrialization, President Dr. Majumdar has talked about the kind of necessity of a global theory. Obviously, capitalism is a global market process. So if we talk about combined and uneven development, that to a certain extent incorporates various kinds of development in the global context. The first thing is this, that there is a global context of what is called OECD countries, mainly located in North America and Western Europe. And here we find there is a definite shift in 1980s. In 1930s, in response to the I think global depression, and and after that the Second World War, and also to the rise of the Soviet Union and the Chinese Revolution, etc., there was a compact created in the global North between capital, labor, and by our capital trade unions and the government. And as a consequence, there is a notion of welfare state, and that welfare state is predominated the idea of till the 1970s and 1980s. And in 1970s, we know that there is a new kind of theories coming out and releasing the market, etc., as if market is something natural and the state intervention is something unnatural, whereas the state actually plays a pivotal role in shaping markets. That's one aspect of the story. The other aspect of the story, which often we ignore, is the kind of the rise of the East Asian countries, particularly, and that actually to a certain extent changed the nature of the global market, and obviously the rise of China, which absolutely changed the nature of the operation of the global market, because what is called the shift to the service sector in the global North is accompanied by shift to manufacturing sector in China, and that to a certain extent is propelling up in global economy and transforming the global economy to various kinds of trades, etc. And we are witnessing a radical shift in the global economy in that context. Now, in this context, I think whereas India or Bangladesh or Pakistan or Nepal fits in is the fact that first of all, India had always a predominantly informal economy, because these were India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, all these were predominantly agrarian society. And there is a kind of vast majority of the workers were actually concentrated in subsistence peasant agriculture. And that is actually declining. And there took place a shift in the process of the larger industries to service sector industries, and the certain experiments, small scale experiments in comparison to the giant structure of the South Asian economies, from the kind of welfarism, which is a byproduct of the Keynesian economic policies, etc., towards a much more precarious labor, etc. There is obviously a shift, like the Indonil is referring to the kind of the Provident Fund, etc. What is also not realized in India is Provident Fund is completely privatized now. And so there is a different kind of incentives in going for Provident Fund, etc. And many people are actually withdrawing from Provident Fund options, etc., and moving into share market, etc. So it's a very different kind of situation that is prevailing in India. In the context of Pakistan and Sri Lanka, there is a huge there's a huge economic crisis that is a different kind of process. And I know a little bit about Pakistan. I know very little about Sri Lanka. And in the context of Nepal, which is a very interesting thing, is this, that it is just like Philippines and Bangladesh, is actually dependent upon the exporting of the labor instead of industrialization. And what is very interesting, I think Professor Gawali, Dr. Gawali has pointed out, is the kind of the rise. What is in Nepal's context is very interesting, is the rise of the communist movement in Nepal, very close to power, from 1990s onwards, and now also the Maoist communists. And at the same time, there took place a transition away from the state-led industrialization or industrialization process to a kind of what we are seeing all over the world, a kind of real estate development, a certain kind of speculation with the land market and informal labor economy, etc., which we are talking about, and move away from welfarism. So this is, I think, is a very critical. I think that the concept is combined and uneven development, which is again playing a critical role in this context. The only difference is this, that we are finding in the North American and it was obviously there earlier in the United States, is the kind of development of the so-called massive informal labor market. And in South Asia, there is a development of a certain kind of formal labor market, etc. And this is interesting. In other words, the distinction between global North and global South, despite huge inequality, etc., is now being reformulated in a different way. The most interesting story in this, the gender story, because the earlier kind of welfarism was developed on the model of male breadwinner and female homemaker, etc., even in North America, etc. And now we find everywhere, the Bangladesh, whether it is in Bangladesh or whether it is large, malls in United States, the country which I know the best, or in the United Kingdom, is the kind of huge number of women workers predominating the labor market and predominating the precarious labor, which was not there in the earlier context of the highly industrialized world of North America, etc. In fact, I was reminded of when I was talking in 1960s, Henry Pelling, most of people would not heard about him, wrote about labor and trade unionization. And he said that it is now a foregone conclusion in 1966 that majority of our workers work in the industries, and they were predominantly male workforce. And today we find that exactly in England, vast majority of workers are not at all employed in the industrial sector. And that indicates this global shift, but it is a combined and uneven development. And it's a kind of vast kaleidoscope, unlike 1920s and 30s when there was a massive development of factory-based industries. That's all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Basho. We have only 2 minutes left, and Stephen sent me a question, but probably we kind of have time only to receive it as a comment and something to think through. I wonder, Stephen, if you would like to share it yourself?
Sure. My own work has really sort of focused on North America on both sides of the Canada-US border, and how the understanding of industrial closure, can differ, from one country to another. And I was curious about, whether national borders mattered in terms of the understanding or the political response to industrial closure, whether it's in Nepal or Pakistan or Bangladesh or India. But there's no time. I was curious whether South Asia flattens out a lot of differences there.
I can answer it in one sentence, that is, India is a sub-imperial power in South Asia, and it to a certain extent plays havoc with the economy of Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. It doesn't have much more impact on Pakistan, but as it is pointed out, India imposes blockades whenever it suits, particularly when the trade agreement with Nepal or imposes a kind of water sharing agreement with Bangladesh, etc., that plays havoc with the economies of Nepal or Bangladesh, and to a certain extent in Sri Lanka in a different way, financial sector, etc. So in certain ways in South Asia, national border actually matters quite significantly.
Well, thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of the roundtable. Thank you so much to everyone for sharing your thoughts, and your presentations were great. And I learned a lot. And we look forward to having these conversations outside and continue these conversations. And yeah.
And I must say, Piyush, I must say thank you to you and Gab for moderating, and for Gab for hosting and technical support. With the two of you, it would not have been possible. Thank you, Piyush, very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.